Well, it's business, but it's
That's when people used to have a
complaint letters and where's my money letters.
Got up to First Sergeant Schultz.
I know nothing.
Okay, I really want to start on time tonight because I've got a considerable amount of ground to cover. And it's going to be even less organized than usual. So, no, I really mean that. We're going to go back and forth from place to place and even from time to time because I was thinking I'd be doing mostly 6th, 7th century tonight, and then I realized there were things I'd skipped that popped up. Well, you'll see how it works. The first person I want to talk about was born between 530 and 540 in northern Italy. At that time, that in northeastern Italy, at that time, this was during the reign of the Emperor Justinian in Constantinople. Justinian had a general named Belisarius. And Belisarius is widely regarded as the greatest of the Byzantine generals. He was the last great general in the Roman tradition. And because of the barbarians had come down, taken over Italy, taken over Sicily, taken over North Africa, taken over Spain. The Eastern Empire had really shrunk. Belisarius, in his lifetime, expanded the actual territory of the Byzantine Empire by 48%. Now that's incredible. He retook North Africa, he retook Greece, he retook most of Italy, he retook Sicily. I mean, the guy was absolutely unstoppable. So at this point, this part of Italy, northeastern Italy, had already been taken over by the Byzantines. And they situated their capital at Ravenna. Ravenna was a seaport city, and it had been where the Roman Western Fleet was based. So it was a very important city at that time. It's not all that important now. People go there to see the mosaics in two great Byzantine ruins, and also to see the tomb of Dante. But he was born somewhere there, and he was educated in the imperial court at Ravenna. That's pretty much all we know about his early life. Okay, he was a poet, and by the standards of his time, he wrote in Latin. By the standards of his time, he was a very good poet. By the standards of earlier times, he was pretty rotten, frankly. But he wrote long-form poetry, and
excuse me, we are talking about Belisarius, right?
No, we're talking about Venantius Honorius Clementianus Fortunatus.
So Athanasius, okay.
No, Venantius Honorius Clementianus Fortunatus. I don't know what his friends called him. Certainly not that. We know him as Venantius Fortunatus, and you have held in your hands a book with his name in it. He came to prominence as a poet in the court at Ravenna. And he had an eye problem. We don't know exactly what it was, but he was losing his vision and was miraculously cured through the intervention of St. Martin. So he decided, he said, or what do you think, to go on a pilgrimage to St. Martin's Shrine in Tours in France. Well, he took an awfully long way to get there. He visited pretty much every major small, quote, kingdom in East and Central Europe. And his fame increased and increased and increased. He composed long-form poems for all sorts of occasions. And he took his time. He was a traveling poet who was being well taken care of by various local monarchs. Finally, he got to Poitiers, and at Poitiers, he had a remarkable conversion experience. I mean, he was already a Christian, but he had a remarkable religious experience of some sort and became a priest at Poitiers. He lived a good long while and continued to write, and eventually, for a very short time, became Bishop of Poitiers. He was made a bishop at an advanced stage and did not last long. So why is he important? And why was he considered a saint in his own day? Remember, this is still long before the process of canonization. That's 500 years to go. But he became so revered, really, and seen as such a gift of God to the church, not because of the long-form poetry, epistolarians and all that, because of his hymns. He wrote hymns in Latin, and they were much, much, much valued in the early Christian church, the early Latin-speaking church in the Western world. Well, Europe stopped speaking Latin, and the hymns stopped being used until the 19th century. In the 19th century, something happened, and it happened in the Church of England. The Church of England was in terrible shape. I've spoken about this many times, but it's just one of those real important turning points. The Church of England was as close to spiritually dead as a church can be. It was sort of a religious civil service, and very dry, very not much passion, not much anything, really, just kind of going through the motions. And two things came out of this. One was the Methodist revival, which later became an evangelical revival, which emphasized personal holiness and personal self-discipline. And the other was the Anglo-Catholic revival, which emphasized sacramental life, beauty, the arts, and a respect and appreciation for things out of the medieval and earlier period. So this was the big fight. There's some hymns in here that he wrote, and you'll know some of them. And I hope all my little piece of paper fell out. That's helpful. I'm going to, one of the better known, well, at least in other denominations, because these hymns have been picked up by a lot of people, is called The Royal Banners Forward Go, Vexilla Regis, and that was probably his most famous. It was translated by John Mason Neale, who was largely responsible for the revival of ancient Christian music. He was a brilliant linguist. But, sorry, I'm having trouble reading. I apologize for that, but I can't do a thing about it. Yeah, The Royal Banners Forward Go. Here's one that if you don't know it, you haven't been in church for a while. Hail thee, festival day, blessed day that are hallowed forever. That is a great Easter hymn. There are also two other versions of it in the hymnal, using other bits of poetry from Benedict of Fortunatus. One is for Ascension Day, same chorus, different, but the verses about Ascension, and another for Pentecost. You probably, most of you, I would expect, because I'm certainly no great specialist, probably know Sing My Tongue the Glorious Battle. The Glorious Battle. That's him. When you sing that, you're singing something that was written in another language, admittedly, over 1,000 years ago. And finally, Welcome, Happy Morning, Age to Age shall say. These are all his work. think how many years of hymnody there are. People have been writing Christian hymns for a long time. There are only about 600 of them here. And he's got all those. This guy he had an amazing effect. And
were all those translated in English by Neil?
I know that two of them were. I'm not sure about the other translators. I should have looked that up. By the way, if you own a hymn roll, if you don't look up top, in the back there's some very interesting things that are indexes. I know saying an index is interesting, makes me sound really, really like a cool guy. But there's an index of authors, translators, and sources. And you might be surprised to see some of the names in there of some of the authors and some of their translators. Anyhow, what's my point? My point in including Fortunatus is firstly to show some appreciation for Christian music and hymnody, which became extremely important right away in the church. The singing of psalms began almost immediately because we borrowed it from Israel. But also to make the point that sometimes things get lost and then they get refound. For centuries, nobody cared about Fortunatus or any other Latin hymnist, really. Well, the Romans did, but that would be about it. But Fortunatus was rediscovered, and he continues to make him. I don't know if there's such a thing as post-mortem good luck, but he was very, very lucky in his rediscovery by the church and all that was done for it. I'm looking for. Nope, okay. Okay, maybe we won't go as long as I thought. All right. I'm going to tell you a little bit from memory about St. Martin. Remember I mentioned that Fortunatus had been healed of this eye thing after appealing to St. Martin. Who was Martin? Martin was a really important, we got some pictures of Martin, I think.
It's not the El Greco one there.
Yeah, that's the El Greco.
Well, I know that.
And yeah.
But is that the saint that you're looking for?
Yes. There are two pictures here of St. Martin, and they're very different. They are pictures of a specific incident in his life, which was a turning point. He was born in the Roman province of Pannonia, which is now Hungary, but he wasn't Hungarian. He was Italian. His father was a tribune in the imperial cavalry. And this is in the 400s, I think, 300s, 400s. His father was tribune in the imperial cavalry, and it was expected that he would follow along in his father's footsteps. So at the age of 15, he was enrolled in the imperial cavalry, and he served. But his family did not remain in Pannonia long. His father got reposted to northern Italy. And Martin became very interested in the Christian movement, but he kept that a secret. And he acted because it was frowned upon. The emperor wasn't too happy with the idea. But he maintained an interest in the faith and actually became a catechumen. That is, a person who is studying to be baptized while still a soldier. This incident, go up to the El Greco first, if you like, if you could. Yeah, I want you to compare these two paintings. This is an art history thing. This is an El Greco, and this guy looks about as much like a Roman soldier as I do. And the story is about him meeting a poor man shivering in the cold, underclothed. Well, this guy's more than underclothed. He's totally gone. And he's giving him his green cloak. Now, if you look at the next one, This is by a German painter. Can we go up just a touch? I don't think I've got his name on there. It's his only really well-known work. And you'll see this guy really looks like he's beat up. And he does have some clothes on. And what's he doing there? He's got this huge red military cape. He's cutting it in half to give half to the beggar. That night he had a dream. And in the dream, Christ appeared to him, holding the half of the cape. And he said, Martin, who is only a catechumen, gave me this cape. Well, that was it for Martin. He was all in now. So, the rest of the story is a little difficult to follow, but I'm going to simplify it as well as I can. He went to the emperor. Remember, he was part of the emperor's imperial guard, and said, I've become a Christian. I can no longer fight. I want to get out of the army. And the emperor said, you're a coward. You know we're facing this barbarian army. And they were. There was an army of some Germanic barbarians. There were always Germanic barbarians, says the guy with a lot of German ancestry. He said, you're a coward, and you will not release. You're going to fight with me. And Martin was quite angry, not at being refused so much as at being called a coward. And he said, I am no coward, and tomorrow I will stand in the front line unarmed and advance alone ahead of the army against the enemy. And Justin, not Justinian, Justin said, yeah, let's do that. The next morning, the barbarians sued for peace, unexpectedly. And Justin apparently thought, this guy's got more going for him than I expected. I better get rid of him. So he let him go. And Martin spent some years, we don't know exactly how long, he spent some years as a sort of monk. I'll talk more about that later, much later. A sort of monk, but not in a community as such, but somewhat under the influence of the then Bishop of Tours. Eventually, he did become a monk and finally a bishop. His I wish I could find that thing. His cape, the half that he had returned, became an important relic for the Merovingian kings. And people believed that he was a miracle worker, that he could do healings, et cetera, that prayers to him would be effective in that respect. And so his place became very important. His burial place became very important as a day of pilgrimage, as a place, rather, of pilgrimage. Man, this thing is really screwed up. Sorry, the printer bit me. Okay, so, interesting sub-facts. The name for a cape in Latin is capa. So, to make that a little cape, to put a miniaturizing suffix on it, it becomes capella.
Which means chapel.
Pardon?
Means chapel also, doesn't it?
I'm getting there.
Sorry.
In Tours, where Martin's relics were kept, they built a small building beside the church to keep the cape. The cape was called the capella because it was now a little cape. It had been cut in half. And that became the word for chapel all over Europe, all over Western Europe. When the Merovingian kings went to war, some monks would accompany him with the cape. It was carried with the army as a source of blessing. These monks were known as capellanes or capellani, and that's a root word for chaplain. That's what a chaplain is. So don't say I don't tell you anything useless, because man, you have no use for that. But I'm fascinated by etymology. Anyhow, that was Martin, and that was the first flashback. Now on to St. Augustine or St. Augustine, whichever way you want to pronounce it, of Canterbury. We don't know a lot about his early life. He was born in Rome, 604, 605. We think in Rome, maybe not. Don't really know. He seems to have been like a lot of these this period's important religious types. He seems to have been born into a very good family, and in time he became a monk, and he became the prior, which is just under the abbot, of the Benedictine monastery of St. Andrew in Rome. Now, that was a very important monastery. It was on the Caelian Hill, and it had been founded by Gregory the Great, who was still Pope Gregory the Great, who was still in Augustine's time. He was still alive, and he was still Pope, and he was still super important. One of the most important historically of the popes. And he had given away virtually all of his private wealth and founded this monastery on the Caelian Hill, which had been his family's home. Anyhow, so he actually lived there. The Pope actually lived there in the monastery and was officially the abbot, but Augustine was really in charge as prior. Now, there is a story, which I'm sure most of you have heard, which is of questionable provenance, but it needs to be told anyhow, that one day Augustine and the Pope were in the Forum, and they saw a dealer in slaves, and he had these beautiful blonde children slaves. And Gregory said to the slave dealer, "Who are these children?" And he said, "They are Angles." They didn't see too many blondes down there at this point. "They are Angles, and their king is Aella." And Gregory is supposed to have said, "Not angles, but angels, and we will teach them to sing hallelujah." What we do know is that whether that story is true or not, Gregory did something that really hadn't been done before. I've talked a lot about, this is well, good. Just leave that one up there if you would, please. I've talked a lot about missionary efforts, how the Celtic monks went, and there were a lot of missionary efforts, but they were small. And they were usually just one or two individuals, or maybe a few more, but nothing like what Gregory had in mind. Gregory wanted to Christianize England. And he put together a mission under Augustine of about 40 monks to head off to England. Well, it had been a long time since there had been a Roman presence in England. It was thoroughly barbarian. And as far as Gregory knew, almost certainly thoroughly pagan. So he sent these 40 monks off to England. And in June of 596, they set off by land across southern Gaul. And the closer and closer they got to the English Channel, the more they heard about the ferocity of these barbarian pagans. and how terrible they were, and how vicious they were, and how impossible to deal with they were. And they turned back and went back to Rome. And they said, essentially, look, we've been hearing a lot about England. There are a lot of pagans left in Gaul. Can we just, work with them? No, he sent them back. So, in 596, in July, didn't take him long to send him back. He set out again. It took a while. I don't think they were in a hurry. And in the spring of 597, they landed in Kent. And the king of Kent was Ethelbert. It was pagan. And they went to Ethelbert and said, we've come to hear about Jesus. And he said, in effect, yeah, I know, my wife's a Christian. And she was. Her name was Bertha. And she, not only was she a Christian, this is the thing, she was a Catholic Christian. She was not from the Celtic Church. She was from a part of Gaul. So King Ethelbert treated them very well. He gave them a place to live, an old church, allowed them to preach anything they wanted to, and he really supported them, even though he was a pagan. A lot of people were converted, including Ethelbert, the king. And that's just in the first year. There were so many conversions. Apparently, thousands of them on Christmas, thousands of people were baptized on Christmas Day of 597. Augustine had been made bishop of the English by the Bishop of Arles, under the instruction of Gregory the Great, of course. So, Augustine wrote to the Pope saying, wow, Christmas Day, we baptized thousands of people. And he said, we need more guys. I need more advice. I need more guys. Things are really rocking here. So they came back and they had with them what's known as a pallium. A pallium is a very special type of stole. It's given only to archbishops, that is, to bishops who have authority over other bishops. And there are all sorts of special things about it, but it's pretty much the highest thing you can get other than being a cardinal. So Gregory sent this to Augustine, saying, okay, you're now the Archbishop of England. And here's some more missionaries, and go and do good. So we have lots of letters between Augustine and Gregory, which is interesting. There is the possibility of a lot of insight into it. Among other things, he said, yeah, sure, you can take over pagan temples and turn them into churches. That's a good thing to do, and so forth. He also told him to consecrate 12 more bishops. And they really were very successful in Kent. Augustine founded Christ Church, Canterbury as a cathedral with an attached monastery. It was then known as the Monastery of Saints Peter and Paul. After his death, it became known as St. Augustine. And it survived for a very long time. It survived until the destruction of the monasteries by Henry VIII. Canterbury, yeah, okay.
Father, may I ask a question right here? The queen, who was already a Christian when they come in, would that have been from the Irish?
No, she was from Gaul. She was a Catholic Christian, not a Celtic Christian. And thereby, her name was Bertha, by the way. Augustine held 2 conferences at which he tried to unify the Celtic churches with the Roman Church. They both failed. That second conference was his last recorded act. the attempt to bring the Celtic churches into, essentially under papal authority and into, we're sort of looking for conformity, and into conformity with the usages of the Western Church. So, and it said Augustine is, you will hear him called the apostle to the English. There were Christians there before. There were. What he was bringing was Catholic Christianity, which eventually did triumph in England. And he is still highly regarded, not just in England. He is well thought of in other places as well. Can you see this? I don't know how well you can see this. This is a statue of Augustine. And in his left hand, he's got a book, undoubtedly a book of Gospels. In his right hand, he's got a small building of a church. This is very typical. This is a typical piece of ecclesiastical iconography, that if someone has founded or been responsible for the building of a particular building, then it's very common to show them with a model of it in their hand. So when you see that in a painting or whatever, that's what it means, that he was a church founder. They've chosen to represent it as rather small and plain, which is probably quite right. But as I say, Augustine is revered, not just in Britain and Wales and Scotland, but you know where this is from? I'll let you all guess. None of you will get it right.
Where is it supposed to be from?
Yeah, where is this taken? Where is that statue?
Florida.
Palermo. It's outside the cathedral in Palermo, capital of Sicily. So that's a long way from Canterbury. Trust me.
Is the Gregory too here, also the father of Gregorian chant? Is this the same?
Yes. Yeah, this is Gregory the Great. Gregory the Great is one of the most fascinating figures. I thought about presenting him tonight, but I realized it was too complicated. He had a very long history as Pope, and it was a very tangled time because it was while the Byzantines were retaking Italy, and during his papacy, most of the time, they held the eastern part, but not the western part. So he was and he officially saw himself as being part of the Roman Empire, and under the authority of the, to some degree, although he differed with him when he wanted to, under the authority of the emperor at Constantinople. But at the same time, Rome was usually under this or that barbarian king. Justinian did eventually Belisarius did eventually take it, but it was not soon. And he's seen as sort of a transitional figure between the very early church, the imperial church rather, and the medieval church. And Gregory's reforms, particularly his reforms of the church's charitable work, made a major impact on the history of the church in the West. He really was a very, very, very competent guy. Now, we're going to drop back another 100 years for our main guy. And our main guy is our main guy for a couple of reasons. You may have noticed, when St. Augustine arrived, he brought with him monks, and they were described as Benedictine monks. I mean, monks of the order of St. Benedict of Nursia. And he is a guy I need to talk about. That's some lane. He was born around in a town called Nursia. It was called Nursia then. It's Nursia now. It was Nursia then. And he was a twin. He had a twin sister. It was named Scholastica. He was clearly brought up in a Christian household. And as a fairly young man, probably in his early or mid-teens. He was sent to Rome. Nursia is not too far from Rome, to finish his education. He was sent with one servant who is described as a nurse and housekeeper. Apparently he was sometimes sickly, but this was a much older woman, apparently, who was sent to accompany him. What he went to study was rhetoric. Rhetoric, we don't like the term rhetoric now. We usually take it to mean deceptive speech. But it properly understood, rhetoric was the art of persuasive speaking. Now, at a time when a lot was done in public meetings, this persuasive speaking was a very important part of community life. The ability to persuade people to support you for an office, the ability to persuade them to convict this guy or not convict that guy. Persuasive speaking was part of what you had to master in order to sort of climb the ranks of society. So he, and success. But by Benedict's time, successful speaking had once again become, successful rhetoric had once again become purely the art of persuasion. Now, when the term had been introduced in ancient Greece, it had some other meanings, but it decayed into this there too. Originally, it was about being able to explicate the truth. But now it wasn't about being able to explicate the truth. It was about being able to convince people that what you wanted them to believe was the truth, whether it was or not. Incidentally, there's a famous incident in Roman history, Roman Republican history, where the first philosophers Greek philosophers came to Rome and to demonstrate their powers. And they presented a case. I forget the details of it, but on the first day of a 2-day event, they argued with great persuasiveness, an unbeatable argument about the truth of the proposition. The next day they came back and argued with equally great success against the proposition. The senators immediately expelled them from Rome and said, "We don't want any philosophers around here." All you are good for is to make the better argument make the worst argument seem the better. Anyhow, that is what rhetoric had become. And the students who were there, they were careerists, okay? They were rich young men expecting to rise anyhow, living fairly dissolute lives, and all on the make. And Benedict just hated it. It was not his thing at all. He just thought, this is iniquitous. And if I stay here in Rome, I'm going to lose my soul because I'm going to be soiled by this. So he left. His family were apparently not happy with him, cut him out of his inheritance, and he lived in a small village outside, fairly, not too far outside of Rome. Pardon me. He began to believe that he was called to even greater solitude, that he needed to get away even from this small village. And so he moved to about roughly 40 miles from Rome into the mountains around Subiaco. And this was a famous place for monks to be. Now, I said I was going to talk about sort of monks and what I meant by that. The first monks were not in monasteries. The word monk comes from the Greek word for one. And they did not live in communities as such. They lived as solitaries. They were almost like hermits, but not quite, because they would tend to live not too far from each other, but each in his own place, a cave or a small hut. And they had no real common life and no common rule. Each of them followed what he saw as the path to holiness, which almost always involved extreme asceticism, really extreme asceticism, solitary prayer and contemplation. That was what you did. They depended largely on the charity of other Christians to bring them food and stuff. And that was what a monk was, a solitary. Not that they weren't complete hermits, but some of them formed relationships, friendships, mentoring relationships, but they were not a community at all. And there was no rule. While he was there in the mountains of Subiaco, Benedict accepted as a director another hermit monk named Romanus. And he stayed there for years, 3 or 4 years. The word of his holiness and his intelligence and so forth brought fame. And other monks would come to him and ask him for advice, ask him for leadership, ask him what he thought should be done about this or that. Finally, a group of them came and said, we want to put ourselves under your authority as a community. We want you to lead us. And he said, no, you don't. He said, you don't want that, because I'm too strict for you guys. You wouldn't like it. And they said, oh, no. We know you're the guy we need. Come on. Don't say no to this. So he did. It didn't work out. It really didn't work out. They tried to poison him. So he decided that this was not the place for him.
Good Christian thing.
And he left. He left them. What happened to them? We don't know. So Benedict was once again a solitary. And another bunch showed up. And they said, look, we know those other guys let you down, but we're different. Come with us, be our leader. We'll follow you. And he did. And it worked. This time it worked. And he founded 12 monasteries. And they all thrived. He traveled around from one to one, spending time in each, and so forth. Another quote, holy man, hermit, monk, whatever, made a lot of trouble for him. He was apparently envious of his reputation, and I'm not exactly certain, I haven't been able to find out, although I did look, exactly what it was that this guy was doing, but it was unpleasant enough that Benedict left those 12 communities under their own abbots and founded yet another monastery, and you've all heard of it. It became the most important monastery in Western Europe. It was at Monte Cassino. Why so important? Because this time, Benedict produced a book, and it became, seriously, one of the most important books in Western Europe for centuries. It's simply called The Rule of St. Benedict. Now, he's not the first person to try to write a rule for a community of monks. There was a previous attempt. We don't know who wrote it. It's just called The Rule of the Master. And The Rule of the Master had been written earlier. It is, as a piece of literature, it's impossible. I mean, it wanders all over the place, and it's repetitious, and it looks as if maybe somebody just wrote things down over a long period of time and then said, hey, I've written a book. That is not Benedict. Benedict's rule I'll talk about it later. The rule of St. Benedict is what he believes about the nature of living in community and instructions on how he wants it to be done. And I'm going to go through and give you a lot of examples, because Benedict, to my mind, is one of the most attractive of the early saints. The first word in the rule of St. Benedict is listen. He believed very, very strongly in the power of the word. Remember, he was undergoing training as a rhetorician. He believed very, very strongly in the power of the word, both the word of the gospel, the word of the Old Testament, the word, and also, in a much lesser sense, the word of the rule itself. His monks lived in community, and he had his rule was for the management of the community. It laid out who the officers were to be, what their jobs were to be. The abbot was the absolute ruler of the monastery. He pointed out that the abbot should always remember that his word, his name, his title came from the Aramaic word for father, and that he was to be like a father to his monks. He was to enforce the rule, but to do it humanely and with an acceptance of the reality of human weakness. He always had, when the monks took their meals, they never took their meals in silence. There was always a reader, reading either from scripture or from the rule. We wish this rule to be read frequently to the community, he said. So, Benedict said that the proper life for a monk is not a life of extreme asceticism and withdrawal from the world. He said it's a balanced human life lived for God. And what do you mean by balance? He divided the monk's day into 4 periods. A period of manual labor. Usually this meant agricultural labor in the early days, because he said the monk should support himself. The monastery should support itself economically, not be beggars, but produce enough that they can feed themselves, take care of themselves, and have money to give away and to offer hospitality. So, manual labor, part of the day. Worship, part of the day. Worship in community. He felt it very important that the monks not say their offices, their daily prayers, separately, but that they come together to do it, and that they sing the Psalms. He understood the Psalms as prayers, which they are. They're addressed to God. And he said, if you pray together, you will love one another. The third portion of the day was set aside for study, mostly of Scripture, sometimes of other things. And by study, he meant serious reading and reflection and memorization. He believed very strongly in the power of memorization. Remember, these monks were not sort of cloistered guys who never came in contact with the world. They were more like Eastern Orthodox monks who on occasion will be sent out to preach, on occasion will be sent out to tend to the needs of parishes. And he wanted them to know the scripture so well that they wouldn't have to carry books. Obviously, I failed at that. I carry books all the time. And finally, the fourth part of the day, rest, sleep. He said a sleepy man likes to make excuses. So he wanted his monks to be well rested so that they could attend to the duties that he felt were important. So what were they? Poverty, chastity, obedience. Firstly, poverty. The monks owned nothing individually. Everything was owned corporately. Not so much as a pen. Nothing. Even the clothes they wore were not their own. They belonged to the monastery. Chastity. That's obvious. Obedience. Absolute obedience to the abbot. He believed that the only way that the community could live in peace was if all of the monks were willing to be obedient to the abbot in all things, and that this would make them truly servants of Christ. He preached a great deal about humility. He held that it was that the first degree of humility is obedience, the willingness to surrender one's own will, and that would foster selflessness, a willingness to put others above oneself. This emphasis on a balanced life is summed up in the Benedictine, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Saying, anyhow, motto, that's it, the Benedictine motto, ora et labora, prayer and work. And work of the hands, work of the mind. He placed a great emphasis on hospitality. And remember, monasteries were places where travelers would hope to be allowed to spend the night because they'd get fed in all probability and they'd be safe. And so he felt that the welcoming of guests was a very important part of the monk's job, in that it would teach them humility and service, and it would remind them that Christ himself was a visitor in this world. But part of what makes the Benedictine rule so attractive to the modern mind, or at least mine, is it was subtle. He understood the realities of the human condition. And if you say, yes, we are welcome to, anyone is welcome to come and spend the night and share our table, and they were, then some are going to come and stay forever. So he said, you will turn no one away, but you won't let anybody stay more than 3 days unless they're sick. If they are, you can keep them as long as you need to. Yeah, obviously he preached moderation, avoiding excess in anything, food, drink, anything. He said he had, again, balance. So this became the handbook for many other monastic groups other than the Benedictines. They adopted the Benedictine rule because it made so much sense. Sometimes tweaked it a bit here and there, but it became the standard for Western Christianity. And why do I say he's such a toweringly important figure? Because for centuries, the monasteries were the center of culture and learning in Western Europe. When everything else went to heck, the monasteries managed to hang on. And they preserved so much of what was valuable, and we still consider valuable in our culture. But it is so commonsensical that a lot of people who weren't monks enjoyed reading it and felt that it offered good advice on living in community in general. Not the specific monastic rules, but the principles and some of the practices. It did not hurt that, let me see if I can find it. It did not hurt that Benedict, in writing it, says this, and it is clearly something that he held in mind while he was writing it. There is nothing better to display the truth in an excellent light than a clear and simple statement of facts. He laid it out in simple Latin. It's not florid, it's not poetic, it's simple, straightforward prose. Anybody who, you don't have to have a rhetorician's education to appreciate it. I want to read you some of the things that he said in the book to give some insight, I think, into his character and into his desire for order and his gift for humane administration. The order gives the daily routine, what hours for this, what hours for that. And it also outlines the roles. The abbot is the head of the monastery, and his second in command is called a cellarer. No, he's not the guy who keeps the wine cellar. He's responsible for all the food and all the drink. There's another guy in charge of disciplinary measures. There's another office for spiritual guidance on an individual basis. He thought out what will this community need, and here they are, and it worked. In his advice to the abbots, the one thing, you've heard me quote it before, but I like it so much I'm going to throw it at you again, where he said, the wise abbot, he was talking about disciplinary matters, the wise abbot sees all but overlooks much. And I think that almost sums up his character. He also said, in regard to discipline, be careful to be gentle, lest in removing the rust you break the whole tool. That's nice. He said of the abbots, he should first show them in deeds rather than words all that is good and holy. Another thing, this is what I was referencing, I said you'd like this. Prayer ought to be short and pure unless it be prolonged by the inspiration of divine grace. He had sort of turned his back on a lot of the florid oratory that marked a lot of the Christian writings of that point, and Christian speeches too. In terms of the necessity for having a plan for your life, a plan for how to live, a rule, he said, idleness is the enemy of the soul, and therefore the brethren ought to be employed in manual labor at certain times and at other times in devout reading. He really, that speaks for itself.
Was Benedictine Italian, not German? Pardon? Was Benedictine Italian, not German?
I can't hear you.
Was he Italian, not German?
Yes, he was Italian. His advice to the monks as a whole: to attribute to God and not to oneself whatever good one sees in oneself, but to recognize always that the evil is one's own doing and to impute it on one's self. You may think this is over the top, but it's not. Notice he doesn't say, as so many of the early saints seem to enjoy saying, I'm totally worthless. I'm no damn good. You know, I'm a worm and no man. I'm awful. I'm terrible. I'm sunk in sin. I'm hopeless. He says, well, whatever good you see in yourself, be sure to attribute it to God. He doesn't say there's no good in you. It's a different approach. He cared so much about this concept of orderliness, because he said it's useless to subdue the flesh by abstinence unless one gives up his irregular life. You think a life with rules, a life with patterns, a life with steady duties is the way to greater holiness and greater knowledge of God. He was particularly concerned about acts of charity because that was what monks did. And he says that they are truly monks when they live by the labor of their hands. He really felt that the monastery should be not only self-supporting, but more than self-supporting, that they should be able, out of their own labor, to be generous. And finally, this one. This is from part of his rule, part of the rule dealing with food, where there are two parts that I want you to know. One I find is very good. He wrote at some length about what the monks should and should not eat. You know, they had days when they abstained from meat and that sort of thing. And he ends that particular passage by saying, nevertheless, when you are traveling, eat whatever is set before you and give thanks for it. It was not, you can't see him sitting there thinking, oh no, I couldn't eat that. He said, yeah, I'll eat it, it's just, it's humane, it's common sense, it's holiness, but it's not fanaticism. And finally, just because it amused me, we read it as true that wine is by no means a drink for monks. But since the monks of our day cannot be persuaded of this, let us at least agree to drink sparingly and not to satiety, because wine makes even the wise fall away. A few more things about Benedict. He really felt very strongly, as I had said earlier, about the Psalms. He really wanted the monks to know the songs and sing them. And he felt that this was important, so important that he referred to it as the work of God. And his argument was that Jesus sang these, so we should too. These are prayers that Jesus prayed because he sang the Psalms. That's what they did. That was ancient Israel's hymn book. And Benedict really, really held heavily into that, which makes a lot of sense. It does. So that's Benedict. And
one soul catches fire from another. Where can we get all this? Is this all in his?
The rule of St. Benedict.
That's all.
Yeah.
Everything you're telling us now about this.
Pretty much.
Okay.
You mean all the quotations?
Yeah, the quotations.
Pretty much all of them are from the rule. Yeah.
Okay.
He's just a toweringly important figure because of what his monks accomplished, and because he introduced this idea of, yes, you can be holy without having to go live on top of a pillar out in the desert for 40 years. That there is a way for Christians to live together that will be spiritually good for them. Now, not everybody's called to the monastic life, obviously, but at the same time, those are the principles of living in a Christian community. And underneath the detail, there are the principles, and the principles are sound. So his importance, historically, I would say, is because of the importance of the book in terms of what the monasteries came to mean for the preservation of Western civilization. But his importance to us as individuals, it's very much the way I feel about Francis de Sales. The advice that he gave and the principles that he espoused are every bit as valid as they were. And they are holy, they are sacred, but they're also very humane and very, I don't want to quite say moderate, but there's a certain subtlety there. It's not a one-size-fits-all religiosity. Even though there was that rule, there were different roles within the monastery, and in his advice regarding discipline and so forth, treat these people this way. He talks about the necessity of how the young children should be disciplined other than the monks. And yes, there were young children in the monasteries. It had already become a practice to give young boys to monasteries and young girls. People to give their children. Sometimes this was children of the poor who couldn't support them, and the boys would be raised as monks. Sometimes they were orphaned, and sometimes they were children of, later on, particularly children of the well-off, when the monasteries had become so powerful a force in the culture that to be an abbot of a monastery like Monte Cassino was more important than being a bishop, and to be an abbot of a major thing. So, since it was a class-ridden society, the upper classes decided, well, my son should be an abbot too. Let's get him started now. And that was done. So, we are early, but that's all I've got.
So if we went on Amazon and ordered the Rule of St. Benedict, we would get.
Yeah, you can buy it. Yeah, it's not terribly long. I read it, ma'am.
Do you think there's any possibility that first experience that he had gathering monks to into a monastery, and then it was too strict and they tried to poison him, do you think that might have lessened his if he had been prone to be fanatic about discipline before, that it sort of eased him off of that, maybe?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how tough he was on them. It certainly could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't he stay on the go?
Sure.
He didn't live in one place. He kept moving and building. Yes.
Well, once he got Monte Cassino built, that was his place.
Never mind.
But he did to travel around from the 12 previous places he had started. It was very interesting how he had set those early ones up. He didn't do this in Monte Cassino, but he did it for verse 12. He subdivided them into groups of 12. He had a lot of monks. It was a popular movement. And they did not all meet as an entire, it appears that they did not all meet as one community. They met in their subgroups, their small groups of 12 each. We don't know as much about those as we would like, unfortunately. We know a great deal about Monte Cassino, and because of the success of the rule. And it was considered the most important monastery in Western Europe for centuries. And oddly enough, because you would think it would have been somewhere in France, but what many people feel, what many scholars would say was the second most important was Canterbury, which was also a Benedictine house, and it became quite a center for scholarship, and it had a lot of a lot of the monks there and a lot of the people who came there to study were not from England. They were mostly from what we would call France. Well, I hope y'all don't feel cheated, but that is all I have for tonight.
When did the sisters, the female nuns,
Oh,
when did that start? And did he?
in the Benedictine rule, the actual nuns living in community,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
not
the
just the
Benedictine.
one that started at Monte Cassino.
Huh.
You remember I told you you had a twin sister named Scholastica?
She was the one that, okay.
She started the female Benedictine orders there. They both lived into their 60s, I think, but they were very close. And she died 40 days before he did.
Wow.
It was very, very close.
Is Monte Cassino still a monastery now?
Yeah, but Monte Cassino in World War II was turned into a massively powerful defensive position by the Wehrmacht. And it took months to take it, and it was virtually reduced to rubble. It was a great loss to Western culture. So the buildings that are there now are not, they don't go back farther than 1940. That's quite a story. But it was really very hard fighting, very hard and very destructive. Monte Cassino was sort of like, sort of the artistic equivalent, I would say, of Assisi. With all the wonderful frescoes and stuff. All gone. Shame. I've never been there, but yeah. This is I don't know who did this picture of Saint Benedict. I don't know who
Looks
did
like
that.
Flemish North. Something.
Yeah, it looks rather very nice. I don't know whose picture that is, but and it's certainly not done from life. It's much later.
What did you say?
But I think the way he's chosen to portray him, I think, it seems to me appropriate to his character. I like the look of the guy.
Rick, what was his name?
Benedict of Nursia. B-E.
I thought you said, never mind.
Sorry, what are we talking about? I thought we were talking about the same.
He said something, I thought he had the name when you didn't
Oh, the
have it.
artist.
That's all I was.
Oh, you have the artist name?
I put words in his mouth.
Okay,
I
never
heard
mind.
something too about it.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Anyhow, thank you all. And, I will try to be more, to stay more on target with the chronological approach next week. But I really felt I needed to talk to you about St. Martin because I had neglected him. And I remember when I mentioned that Columba was seen as sort of a soldier saint, some of your eyebrows went up. There are a lot of saints who were soldiers. And Martin is one of the earliest. He comes to so much prominence in the medieval period, which is obviously here much later, precisely because he is. And there's a famous fresco series in Tours of the life of St. Martin. This is a medieval fresco series. The final events in the life of St. Martin, okay? The final one is him being knighted. No, that didn't happen. But, he was, that knightly culture really loved Martin because he was a soldier and he was a gentleman and all this kind of stuff.
Well, think of two places in the scripture where Jesus has incredible praise of soldiers.
Oh, yeah, centurion.
And I
He
think
loved the centurion.
sometimes that a soldier, in a way, gives his life in a certain sense, in the way that he understands giving his life for the people. But I just think that
And
Jesus has
subverting
wonderful
his own interest to the
Yeah.
good of the group.
Obedience.
One last thing from me regarding Martin. It won't surprise you to hear that Martin is the patron saint of soldiers. He also has another group of which he is a patron, which I find very amusing. He's the patron saint of tailors. They cut cloth. Samantha, what were you saying, lady?
I have 3 questions. One's a bit silly, and 2 are pretty quick. So, the quick one first. How come the soldiers had to become catechumens in order to be baptized, and they had to study? But the pagans, did they have the same process, or did they just get baptized? Like when we're little, we get baptized
At this point,
right away.
4th century, the catechumenate was really stressed for everybody. There's a simple reason for this. There were lots of heresies bubbling up. And so they really preferred usually at least a year in the catechumenate.
Oh,
At least.
thanks.
Some were longer. And some people extended their catechumenate voluntarily. What they're going to do is keep studying, keep learning, keep developing. Later, we get some instances of people, particularly when Charlemagne was baptizing by force. You didn't know that? Oh, yeah. Frequently, yeah. Charlemagne, at one point, there were like, 10,000 guys or something. And he gave them a choice. They could be baptized or he'd kill them all. So they like, all right, that's an argument. And we are told that these are these fierce Frankish warriors, right? That they were baptized in a river, but they held their swords up out of the water as they went down. So and I heard a stewardship sermon once where a preacher said, a lot of Americans do the same thing with their wallets. Anyhow, you said 2 others.
Yeah,
Good.
there's a longer one, but it's it might be silly. I don't know. But I'm just thinking, what was the appeal to be a monk? Was it just because they were poor? Because he mentioned the balanced life, right? And people would go there. Wouldn't he encourage people to, take a wife later, not to stay a monk, to take a wife later, like the Holy Sacrament of marriage?
No. In the Celtic Church, their clergy were married. I mean, it didn't have to be, but they could be. The Western Church was bought into clerical celibacy very early. And if you became a monk or a nun, that was it. You were not going to marry. You were not going to. That was your life profession. And so, what was the appeal? You realize how often in the course of this I've made reference to various wars and battles and upheavals and plague, and Europe had a few rough centuries in a row there. No, it really did. I mean, I talked about the Emperor Justinian. The Justinianic plague is estimated to have killed 30% of the population of the empire. 30%. It's 1%. I mean, think about that. It was a huge plague. And the monasteries offered a sense of purpose, a sense of stability, and it was, and it would have been, I think it would have been relatively easy for a lot of people to have looked around and said, this world stinks. I'm going to the next one. And the monastery was a sort of stairway to heaven sort of thing. I've never felt the slightest appeal. It has never had the slightest appeal for me, but I can certainly see it. I can certainly see it, that there are some people who are probably much better suited to life in a same-sex community of high-minded people than they are to family life.
I just don't get the point. Like, isn't love kind of the purpose of life? Like, wouldn't they encourage people, there's a person for everyone, even if you want to be alone, No.
All I can tell you is they didn't see it that way.
Okay.
And
For
I'm not
boys in
sure
my
I do
family.
either. I think some people are
Battle.
I think some people are born for a different type of life than the rest of us.
Different type of love.
Yeah, different
Yeah.
type of love.
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
Are there Benedictine monasteries here in America? I just don't know.
Yeah.
There are?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Benedictines are still very powerful.
Are they throughout the world or just mostly Europe and America?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I really don't know. I really don't. Now, you said 3 things, Dave.
Yeah, the third one, you mentioned he was Italian. When I think of Italy, I think of like the dolce niente, the dolce vita, the happiness of doing nothing, not work.
You been to Italy?
Yeah.
That's southern Italy.
Oh.
Go to Milan
Right.
Yeah.
or Padua.
Right.
Very
If they weren't united, there were so
No,
many different
really.
cultures.
Yeah.
Most of America's immigrants from Italy came from Italy and southern Italy and Sicily.
Yeah.
And that is, there's a lot of that. But the Italians say the South begins at Rome. And anything north of Rome is much more heavily, the Lombard area, is
Yeah.
much more heavily, much more, quote, European than Italian. Even the food changes.
That's it.
And one of the wonderful things I learned, Milan has the reputation in Italy that I would say New York has here, which is to say everybody's all about money all the time. Okay, run. And there's an Italian phrase for when you stop on the way to work, you get a coffee and a bagel or whatever. It wouldn't be a bagel in Italy, probably. That's called a Milanese breakfast because it's quick and you're on the run because you've got to go to work. Okay, they don't do that in the South.
Thank you.
North or south, they like to honk their horns and get where they're going.
Yes, the siesta. Yes.
I think in terms of, I can't speak for monasteries with men, but I think convents for women, particularly for women who don't marry, you still can care for people, you can care for children. There's a motherly aspect that I think could be met in a convent. You're very comfortably.
It's a caring environment.
Yes, and I think that's kind of sort of in many ways is an
I hadn't thought
aspect.
about that, but that does make sense. And the female orders have become very important from time to time. One of the things that influenced Benedict Fortunatus when he was in Poitiers to become a priest was the influence of the abbess there, who was Radagunda, who had been a queen in a very unhappy marriage and left it to become a nun. And she ran a big religious house there. The other thing that struck me as I've been reading about these various, some of the ones I've talked about, some I haven't talked about, the extreme emphasis on charity. Always, charity to the poor and so forth. And Gregory the Great really became so incredibly popular and influential because when Rome was under siege, well, not exactly under siege precisely, but there were the enemy armies were swarming all over and burning farms and everything. The city just swelled with refugees, and he managed to get them all fed. And he didn't do it by, miraculous means. He did it by organization. And he set up feeding centers in all of the major churches, made sure they were staffed, made sure they kept good records. I mean, they could have used him in Minneapolis. It was really well organized, and it was part of what made him, his reputation as Pope was his care for the poor in a very organized manner. It wasn't sort of, oh, it would make me feel better. It was these people are hungry. God doesn't want that. Let's get them fed. And he did. And the system that he set up, he had a deacon in charge of each one of these. It was separate from the parish itself. And deacons are responsible directly to their bishop. He was a bishop of Rome. it was a huge undertaking to keep all these people fed because they weren't producing any food at all. Sorry, I get off on the history here. Okay. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure what we're doing next week, but I will. I got so caught up in the multiplicity of available things for this period that I need a period of less devotion.
Samantha, even the pizza is different between Milan and Rome.
Yeah, it's so funny because I've been to Milan and Palermo and all over Italy, and they did say the north and the south is different.
Oh yeah.
And I thought about that, but I guess I didn't think about it all the way.
The bread of the pizza is different.
But in Syria, which was what a lot of the old
Did you see that?